All right, welcome everybody. Come on in, have a seat. So this is the introductory session to the Fall Telecom Policy Challenge, or Tech Policy Challenge. My name is Blake Reed. I'm on the faculty here at the law school. We're so delighted to have all of you guys participating in this competition. It's going to be a blast. I hope it's going to be a really great experience for you. Real quick, to get started here, the goal of this competition, one of the big goals, is interdisciplinary project-based work. So there are folks, even though we are at the law school, who are not from the law school over here. So if you're not from the law school, raise your hands. All right, so I'm imagining most of you guys are from the interdisciplinary telecommunications program. Is there anybody from any other program here? Are you from Atlas?
I'm from Atlas.
All right, tell everybody what Atlas is.
Atlas is, I'm going to mess up the acronym, but it's the Alliance for Technology, Learning, and Society. And I'm the master's program in the ICTD. It's basically tech for development.
Cool. Well, welcome. Will one of the ITP students say a quick word about what ITP is for the law students in the room? I'll cold call, and I think Professor Reed knows some of your names. So. Yeah.
ITP, as it suggests, is interdisciplinary telecom program. It's it comprises of the technological base in the telecommunication, and also the management policy and the business strategy angle. So it's a kind of hybrid program which is comprises of the technology as well as the uses in the business world.
Awesome. Thanks for that explanation. By the way, what were you guys' names? What's your name?
Vivek.
Great.
I'm Jenna.
Jenna, thank you guys for the explanations. So, if you're from the law school, will you raise your hands? All right, so I'm going to ask somebody from the law school to do the same explanation. So what's going on over here at the law school? What do you guys do here?
We study law.
Yeah. All right, so all of the names.
We read a lot.
All right, so the whole goal of this competition is for you guys to bring your experiences and your expertise and all the skills that you're building together. And we have a problem for you that combines both legal dimensions, policy dimensions, technological dimensions, and business dimensions as well. So before we get too far into it, let me introduce the folks that will be helping run this competition. So again, my name is Blake Reed. This is Professor David Reed, who runs the Interdisciplinary Telecommunications Program. This is Dale Hatfield, who among many, many other things is a senior fellow here at Silicon Flatirons. And these guys are going to help give some background about the problem that you're going to be working on. Over here, we have Ediael. I'm going to mispronounce your last name, Ediael. Casa Peralta? Did I get it right? All right, so Ediael is a 1L over at the law school, but has actually worked on the policy issue that we're going to be doing in the challenge for, what, 5 or 10 years? A long time. So she's a ringer, so we didn't let her join the competition. She's actually helping us out with it. And then last but not least is Sarah Schnick-Grun, who is the Director of Student Programs and other important things at Silicon Flatirons. So these guys are all going to help explain what's going on with the competition. So just to motivate you as to why this competition we think is important in addition to interdisciplinary work, it's a chance to really get your hands dirty with a very kind of problem that professionals, both in the legal sector and the telecommunications sector, are working with every day and trying to figure out how to solve a very real problem. It's a chance for you to practice your oral and written advocacy skills, and we really hope it's going to set you up for success in future pursuits, both here at the law school and over in ITP, in terms of looking for jobs and externships, in terms of our journals and clinics, and all the other opportunities that we have going on. So the problem that we're going to be working with this year, that you guys are going to be working with, is all about the digital divide. And so to explain what the digital divide is, I'm going to turn it over to Dale, who's got some slides here that I'll get going. So Dale, please take it away.
Thank you, and good afternoon. Some of you know I'm an engineer, and so I tend to look at these problems a little bit from the engineering perspective. I'm not a lawyer, so the lawyers need to help me out. Anyway, we're talking about universal service, and of course, there's been a historic commitment to universal service in the U.S. And Congress sort of updated in the Telecom Act of '96, updated what we really need, adapting from the statutory goals. And I don't necessarily need to read here. You look at the promote availability of quality service at just and reasonable and affordable rates for all consumers, provide nationwide access to advanced telecom services, make services available to all consumers, including low-income, rural, insular, people living in high-cost areas at rates that are reasonably comparable to what we have here in urban areas. Increase access to advanced telecom services in schools, libraries, and rural healthcare facilities. And to do that based upon an equitable contribution from all telecom providers in a non-discriminatory way. Lawyers can help me out here. We're not talking about a tax, but it's like a tax, isn't it? So when you make an ordinary telephone call, a part of the money that you pay for that call is put into a fund to provide universal service. The things we're talking about, the subsidy could come from what? Just general tax revenues. You could do it. But we do this through an internal subsidy, and one of the problems that we deal with, of course, with convergence is it gets a little difficult sometimes to know what it applies, who should contribute it and who shouldn't. So the right-hand part of the slide is a diagram I cribbed from Brian Tremont of Wilkie Bauer, and now Brian co-teaches the spectrum management class with me in the May semester. That's a plug. So anyway, contributions flow from telecom internet voice providers. Notice these words mean something. Interconnected. If you're not interconnected, what? You wouldn't make a contribution. So those words actually have an impact. Interconnected voice. The assessment on residential and business. Interstate, that's an important word too, end user revenues. So these people have contributed, and it goes into universal service fund programs, and there are 4 of those, and they're administered by the Universal Service Administrative Company, USAC. And little tip, USAC is a good place to go. They have some pretty good stuff on their website. I don't believe it's in our, isn't in the notes.
I don't think so, we can send out an email to you.
Yeah, USAC is a fairly decent place to go to find out. And then, of course, the 4 programs are the High Cost Fund, we'll describe it in a minute, Lifeline, E-Rate, and Rural Healthcare, following what we said in the congressional mandate, and then which distributes funds to eligible entities, primarily telephone companies, to reduce the cost of service. Okay. And one of the key parts of that is USAC is just carrying out what the commission tells it to do. Some people think it has a policy role, but it's primarily just an administrative function. It does what the FCC tells them to do. And then the 4 programs then lead, as it says here, reductions in costs for rural telcos, reduces costs for low-income subscribers, reduces costs for schools and libraries and reduces costs for rural healthcare providers as well. So the idea, of course, the basic idea is that we feel very strongly that people need to have broadband to be able to compete, to be able to do their schoolwork. And we talk about the homework gap and things like that. And we need to provide funding for it. This is the mechanism to carry out what we believe in. Again, if we wanted to, Congress could just do this out of general tax revenues, but it instead does it through essentially a tax, equivalent to a tax on your use of telephone. Anybody else want to say anything? Okay.
There's a mini, like a 101 pager that we sent you about the closing the digital divide, so you should take a quick look at it.
Yeah.
It's just a little bit of it.
It's very good, it's very good, just 2 pages, it's very good. Any other questions, comments? Okay, the first is the High Cross Fund, which is now called the Connect America Fund. This is the fund that I was most involved in. It was something called the Hatfield model at one time. Because basically the idea is if you have a telephone company that's serving Ward up here in the mountains, the cost may be very high up there. So what you want to do, of course, is give some money to that carrier serving that very hard to high cost area to be able, reducing their costs enables them to offer services more cheaply than they otherwise would. And it was based, of course, and if I had to say something fundamental here, is what we're struggling with is we had a pretty good setup for doing what? Basic voice. But that's not what the world's about anymore. So all 4 of these programs are sort of under stress. Maybe under stress is not quite the right word, but we have to figure out, gee, that's not the world anymore. We're dealing, and if we're going to spend this subsidy money, it shouldn't go just perhaps to just what voice, but to be able to provide internet access as well, access to broadband. And then that gets into the question you're being asked here. Okay, I've decided I want to subsidize it, but then you got to define terms, right? If somebody's going to offer something, we as consumers are paying for it, or we as taxpayers are paying for it. You want to make sure you're getting what you're paying for. So you've got to define it, and so some of what you're doing is aimed at that. Give you some additional here information. One of the important things that this fund is capped. In other words, to keep costs, the U.S. is having budgetary problems, and to keep costs under control, it's capped. In other words, so it can't grow anymore. And I won't have time to talk about it here. The subsidy going to people with excessive costs had a choice of whether to accept the subsidy or engage in a reverse auction. It's a really sort of an intriguing thing. We talk about the reverse auction at all. It's sort of an intriguing thing. If this was a general policy class, we jump off and talk about reverse auctions a little bit, but it's not directly germane, so I will resist the temptation to do that. So this is aimed at reducing the cost to the carrier, the provider, the telephone company, for example, so that it in turn can reduce the prices it charges to the end user consumer. Now the Lifeline program is different. You know, you could, the poor person worked up in Ward, you could reduce the price of the ordinary telephone service to $10. But the person may be very limited income, may be elderly, living on an extremely low income. So even though you've reduced the price, that person may still not have the means to be able to get service. So this is attacking the problem. What? One side you're attacking it sort of from the carrier side. This is you're attacking from the consumer side. And as you can imagine, there's questions about who is eligible, what carriers are eligible. For example, if I go up and put up a cheap system and say, okay, I want a subsidy that's not very reliable and so forth, there's that sort of issue. Who should be eligible to receive funding in terms of, who should be eligible to provide the service that the consumer can buy? And then, again, those definitions, who should be eligible for it. And there's been some abuses in some of these programs. You can imagine that, people would get 2 lines at the same house, for example, or 3, and that's really kind of not what, there's battles over that. Person may not really be a low-income person, but may just want cheap telephone service. So there's, anytime you give subsidies, there's always opportunities for abuses, and that's one of the issues. Generally, these are given based upon some other measure. For example, if you're eligible for food stamps, that makes you eligible then for this subsidy. Here again, as I said before, this is another program that's being revised in view of the change from ordinary telephone service to the internet. And of course, this program is the one that your issue that you're going to be addressing is primarily focused on. I would say, however, that you kind of need to think about these because they're all sort of trying to help the same sort of thing. For example, somebody living up in Ward, a good example. But, you know, if there was a library in Ward, you could provide the high bandwidth service to the library, then the person conceivably could go to the library and get the access. So these are really not totally not independent. And you kind of want to be familiar with them, the different ones. There are two other programs that we should probably mention. The E-rate, which I indicated before, is focused on extending broadband service to schools and libraries. And funding there is capped at, as I say, almost $4 billion annually. And then the rural healthcare program, I worked a little bit on it. It's sort of been, it's not gotten off to didn't get off to a very good start, and still struggling. But obviously, with telemedicine and so forth, if you talk about, here again, the ski person up in the ski area might be here the skier, been up skiing or something like that, and broken a bone or something, and you want to send the x-ray, well, that requires broadband facilities, so you want the healthcare facilities to be able to support that thing. And information on those two programs is available at the FC. These are probably, I didn't check the list, but I assume they're in the list of your there is one thing, David, are you going to talk about any about the metrics?
Yes.
Performance, good, because, yeah, because, no, I won't go there again, I was not talking. Let me just put in a plug. The lawyers lean on your technical students to make sure that you understand the difference between megabits and megabits per second. That you understand these terms like latency, backup loss, and some of those things. Maybe David can help you out on that. Because what I'm talking about is I'm going to give a subsidy to somebody. I'm going to give them a subsidy, let's say, to buy a car. Well, you've got to say what kind of car it is, right? You've got to say what the performance is, and that's what we're talking about. What kind of performance do you want to assure that's going to your beneficiaries? What kind of performance that you're providing to beneficiaries with using the equivalent tax dollars? Did I butcher that too bad? Is that okay?
So before we move on, so David is going to give you guys some more flavor about the specific problem that you're actually going to be addressing and the proposal that you're going to have to make. But before we move on, any questions for Dale about the general problem of the digital divide or about any of these programs? Is any of this unclear? So let me underscore this. There's no stupid questions. You guys are all brand new to this stuff. This is complicated stuff, so if you have a question right now, chances are pretty good somebody else in the room has got it, so don't hesitate to ask.
Yes.
I just wanted to ask, like, whose onus is to overcome the digital divide? Is it the government or the Congress who's working on it, or is it telecom companies through the funding that they have created?
Yeah, and other people here can help me out. This is an FCC-run program. And as far as I know, the question that's posed to you does not include state-run universal service programs. States, individual states like Colorado, have their own programs. So it gets confusing, but as far as I know, you're focused on the federal program. Now, what they're doing is operating under the congressional, the FCC has to do things according to the law. And the law is in the Communications Act. And I didn't make it very clear, but the act spells out certain things it wants the commission to do, and one of the things it wants to do is provide universal service, and in the areas, the 4 areas that we end up with those programs. So Congress is, well, Constitution's way up here, okay, and then we have the Communications Act, and then under that we have the rules and regulations made by the FCC, and it's that level we're talking about. Did I butcher that too bad?
No, that's perfect. So Dale always says he's not a lawyer, and then does a great explanation of the law. So the one other dimension to this question, so you asked, whether it's the federal government or whether it's telecom companies involved, right? So the federal government is responsible for administering this fund, right? But they're not out setting up internet service in these towns, right? So for the most part, we'll set aside the issue of municipal broadband for a second, where we have cities and local governments providing broadband. You've got private internet service providers who are actually providing the services that people are using these subsidies to pay for. So in other words, the $9.25 or so that goes to a consumer from Lifeline, that's gonna get paid to somebody like Comcast or AT&T or Verizon. So the private companies have a really essential role here, right? Because if their prices are set too high for the subsidy, then it's gonna be still hard for the subsidy to work. So it's important to think about their role as you're crafting your solution.
In the old days, in some countries, of course, the telephone companies were essentially owned by the country itself, in which case they could price things in a way to encourage universal service. We have always had, of course, here, the telecom in the private sector. Therefore, when we want to encourage universal service, we do it through the private companies generally. Now, there's some exceptions and so forth, but I think that's.
And maybe one other thing to underscore that's specific to the problem you guys are going to get to, where you're looking at how fast or what attributes does the service that the subsidy is going towards have to have. What if the FCC says we're going to require the broadband subsidies to only go for 10 gigabits per second internet access or faster? Does that mean that Comcast networks are going to magically start running at 10 gigabits per second? All right, I heard a no down here. That's right. So there's an interplay between these things, and again, the government has got to work hand in glove with the private sector to make this stuff actually work.
But that's the way the word verse, the government can ask them to go, all the carriers in this area, we want 10 gigabit service out here. Then they say, okay, will somebody provide it at this price? And people say, oh, all of them say sure. Then they